Who would be in the running for vice president?
Well, I can't tell you that, really. I mean, I know who it's going to be.
Give us a hint.
We'll do another show sometime.
The Trump campaign, when we asked them about this segment, says that they haven't had conversations with anybody. It was a very cryptic answer. Trump and Carson have a long history together. Carson worked in the Trump administration, as we told you, had Housing and Urban Development Secretary. They seem to get along quite well. Trump never fired him. That was a distinction that not many cabinet secretaries had. They also both ran presidential campaigns in 2016. Yet, unlike all the other Trump rivals, when seen at the debates, Carson and Trump got along.
Dr. Carson, you just heard his medical take.
He's an okay doctor.
Trump doesn't smile at people like that very often, especially his competitors. Most importantly to Trump, Carson has never upstaged Trump and doesn't seem to have a desire to. He's on a small list of Republicans who haven't criticized Trump but are still broadly acceptable to the base, even to swing voters. Carson was Senate confirmed. And, perhaps most importantly to Donald Trump, he appears to have zero presidential ambition of his own. Ben Carson, in other words, checks an awful lot of boxes. Shermichael Singleton worked as the deputy chief of staff for Dr. Carson in the White House, was also Dr. Carson's faith and coalitions advisor during his brief presidential campaign. Hey, it's good to see you.
Good to see you,
all right, let's talk hypothetically here.
Yeah,
all right, does my logic make sense?
I mean, look, I think that Dr. Carson and former President Trump are going to have to make whatever determination the two of them decide. I'm not certain if the conversation has been asked that you've alluded to in terms of the possibilities of the former president and the former cabinet secretary working together in the Republican general election. We'll see what happens. Anything's possible. But I will say this. Dr. Carson is a man of integrity. He's a man of faith. He is someone who instills comfort in most Americans. He is someone who instills experience after spending years as a pediatric neurosurgeon, being the first to separate conjoined twins by the head. Most Americans are familiar with his legacy. And as an African American, he is someone who instills and exudes pride about what is possible in this country. When you work hard and study hard, you can become something.
But let's talk about this just in terms of the politics of it, right? The key demographic that Joe Biden has the hardest time with is African-American men. Okay, and you think about, in terms of support, more black voters now plan to vote for Donald Trump. He got 6% nationally in 2016, 9% in 2020, 22% now plan to vote for him in 6 battleground states. Does Ben Carson mean something different on the ticket to African-American men for Donald Trump?
I mean, absolutely.
Hold on. Than Kamala Harris does for Joe Biden.
I mean, find someone in America who really likes Kamala Harris, and I'll write you $1 million check. You can't.
I mean, she's married. She's got a couple kids.
But Dr. Carson is a family man. He's raised exceptional children who are all doing some incredible things. He is a man who cares a lot about hard work. Many black men care about hard work. He's someone who understands the importance of the economy and economics in terms of building a business, which he's since done, since leaving medicine, since leaving politics. And so all of these sort of aspirational things of success, family values, of someone who understands the preservation of the family nuclear unit. Dr. Carson has lived all of those things. And so from a black man's perspective, who's looking at a Democratic Party that can't tell the difference between a boy and a girl, and that's embracing all types of very interesting viewpoints, Dr. Carson seems to be someone in many ways who provides stability in a very turbulent environment.
All right, and yet he is talking in godlike terms about a 3-time married, known philanderer from New York.
You know what? Dr. Carson always says, Leland, God uses sometimes the worst people in the world to get his message across. The Bible speaks about that frequently.
And it doesn't surprise you, their relationship? Even I get being cabinet secretary. This
not at all. Not at all.
Give me a moment. Hold on. You were there for some of the big moments between Dr. Carson, then Secretary Carson, and the president. Give me a moment there that says their relationship is different, perhaps, than some other Donald Trump's cabinet secretaries, a lot of whom he does not have that kind of continued relationship.
I think the former president trusts Dr. Carson. I mean, every person.
You think Carson would want to do it? Would it be good for him?
I don't know. Dr. Carson will have to make that determination. But the president, the former president, understands that when Dr. Carson speaks and gives advice, it's coming from a place of deep consideration, prayer, thoughtfulness, and faith. Dr. Carson is not a prideful person. Dr. Carson doesn't do anything. He doesn't act out of selfishness or greed. He acts out of the best interest of those around him. And for someone like former President Trump, wealthy individual, former president, he's used to a lot of people asking for things, a lot of people disliking him. To have the comfort of a friend that just doesn't want anything but your best, that's something that anyone would yearn for in that position.
Well, you know what they say in Washington? If you want a friend, get a dog.
Well, he has Dr. Carson, okay?
There you go.
He's going to advise him well.
Get Dr. Carson. All right, fair enough. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.